This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
Alright, well before I let you try some, can I show you the other problem, which I've put in the same chapter because again it relates to errors, but it is different. And here, can you listen very carefully indeed? It's not hard. A lot of people, though, get terribly confused. If you look at the example there, look at the example, example 2. Biruta has prepared the following trial balance. And if you have just a quick look down, it all looks fairly normal. You've seen a trial balance before. You know, VAN, debit balance, receivables, debit balance, and so on. All are balances. However, if you look, the total of the debits doesn't equal the total of the credits. Okay? Clearly, something's wrong. We've said enough times that if the trial balance doesn't balance, there must be a mistake in the debits and credits. Do we all agree? Hello, you're all reading ahead and things. The trial balance doesn't balance, there have to be errors. And in real life, you would then start checking everything. You know, you start checking the entries, check your balances to make sure it's correct. But the problem is this. Hello. You're checking. Maybe you find an error of 1,000. All right? Well, at the moment, look, the trial balance doesn't balance. I'll get the exact figure in a minute, but we're about 5,000 different, you know? Hello? The chances are it's several errors. And suppose I tell you there's 5,000 difference. I found an error of 1,000. You then have to sit and think, if we found one error of 1,000, does that mean there's 4,000 left to find? Or, if the error is 5,000 and I found a mistake of 1,000, does it mean there's now 6,000 left to find? Do you understand me? And you could end up wasting loads of time. You know, there could be 20 mistakes. And every time you find a mistake, you'll have to say, would the trial balance now, or is there still an error? You know, you could end up... You've got to keep going until you've found all the errors and it balances, yeah? Well, in real life, it can end up wasting time. It really can. I find an error of 1,000. Does that mean there's still 4,000 left, or is there 6,000 left, you know? Well, suspense accounts, as you'll see, is a rather neat little way of keeping a check on the error. That every time we find a mistake, it's a neat little way of checking how much mistake is still left. All right? And what we do is this. That trial balance does not balance. Clearly there are errors. What we do is on a piece of paper, we invent a little T account to make it balance. What am I missing to make it balance? Here, the debit side is 124063. The credit side is 119106. The difference is 4957. Has anybody checked me? Nobody's checked me, but it is. If I had an extra credit of 4957, the trial balance would balance. That was simply the difference. And I say again, if we did have an extra credit, you've got to agree with me. If we had an extra credit, the debits would equal the credits. Clear? Now, this isn't a real T account at all. As you'll see, this is just on a piece of paper. You'll see in a minute it's going to give me an easy way of keeping track of the error. But it's not a real T account. We call it a difference account. For obvious reasons, or less obviously, a suspense account. Now, I said a minute ago, this is not a real account. But I'm about to show you. We'll use this piece of paper to give us a nice way of keeping check when we start to find errors. Okay? However, you're all happy where that figure came from. All right? It's to make the trial balance balance. So here our debits are bigger than our credits. If we did have an extra credit, it would balance. All right. Look back at the question. On investigation, the following errors are discovered. A transposition error was made when posting a sales... Oh, sorry, this is an old-fashioned word. Can you cross out sales day book? Can you write instead receivables journal? Sorry, we used to call it sales day book, but it's now receivables journal. I am sorry. A transposition error was made when posting a receivables journal total of 8132. The correct figure was entered in receivables ledger control account, total receivables, but it was posted to sales account as 1832. Well, I think you can see what's happened. But don't be frightened in the exam. I always have to do this, in fact. Making up little T accounts. What's happened? We took the total from the receivables journal. We debited receivables with the correct amount, 8132. We've credited sales. But of course you can see what's happened. We should have credited 8132, but by mistake, we've credited 1832. Do you agree? I think I mentioned last time, but it doesn't really matter. That sort of error where you can see what's happened. We've just reversed two numbers. We call it transposition, but the word doesn't matter. The question makes it obvious what mistake we've made. All right? Well, we've made that mistake. First of all, I think very obviously, does that mistake stop us balancing? The trial balance didn't balance. Is that a reason for the trial balance not balancing? Of course it is. If the debits don't equal the credits, the trial balance doesn't balance. So, we have found a mistake. How are we going to put it right? Surely, to put it right, you will have to credit sales with the difference. Would you agree? And what is the difference? 8132 minus 1832 It's 6,300. Everybody. Clearly, there's no double entry. The point is, the double entry was wrong. By crediting with 6,300, the double entry is now right. Clear? However, the problem I was referring to before is this. We've found a mistake of 6,300. We knew the out of balance was 4,957. Ooh. How much is the error now? Has this made the error worse? You know, it was only 4,000. Ooh, here's another 6,000. That means there's a 10,000 error. Or has it made it better? That it was 4,000, we found 6,000, there's now only 2,000. You understand what I'm getting at? Now, it may be obvious, but nothing's obvious in the exam, and even in real life, you could waste ages. What I want to know is, having found that error, what's the error now that I'm looking for? You understand me? Well, although Suspense account is not a real account, gives you a really easy way of checking. All you do is this. Whether you actually write down those or you imagine it in your head, you've agreed with me. To correct it, you would credit sales. Finished. But all you do is, you say, credit sales. Let's debit our pretend account. It's not a real debit because it's not a real account. But automatically I know that the error that still remains is whatever the balance now is. Now, we're not going to take a balance. There's no need. But whatever the balance now is, that's the error that's remaining. We've got to look for more errors. Okay? You don't need to think. I say again, it may have been obvious to you. In fact, it really is. Look at the trial balance. You know, if the sales figure on the trial balance is higher, you could have worked out for yourself. The difference remaining has changed, you know. But the beauty of the suspense, you don't even need to think. You say, what entry will put it right? Credit sales. You have a pretend debit to your pretend account, suspense. And there's the error remaining. However, there are more errors, obviously. Look at the next one. The balance on electricity was incorrectly recorded. It should read 615. What does it read at the moment? Electricity? 516. You found it? Mm-hmm. Again, it's transposition. So on the trial balance, you've got 516. It should, in fact, be 615. Will that affect us balancing? Of course it will. If you put the wrong balance in, you won't balance. True? Well, to keep a check on my error, all I say is this. How would I put that 516 right? That 516 is a debit. You agree? To put that right would mean debiting it with a bit extra. True? And so if I debit electricity with the difference, it puts it right. I'll credit my pretend account. And what was the difference? 615 minus 516. I think 99. Again, it's not a real entry. But effectively debit the electricity. Fine. If I credit suspense, well again, although we're not going to take a balance, the balance there is the error I'm still looking for. Am I making sense? Let's do another one. C. One cash payment for electricity of 200 had been recorded throughout as 20. When it says recorded throughout, what does it mean? You know, if you pay electricity, you should credit cash debit electricity, yeah? Presumably that's what they've done. But even though the payment was 200, every entry we've put as 20 by mistake. Okay? Does that affect us balancing? We've paid electricity. We've credited cash. How much have we credited cash with?
20.
We've debited electricity. How much?
20.
It's been recorded throughout as 20. That's wrong. It should have been 200. There is a mistake. Did that mistake affect us balancing? No. It is wrong, obviously, but it doesn't stop us balancing. The trial balance balances as long as the debit equals the credit. Clear? The correction, I think, is obvious. You should credit cash, debit electricity with 180. But the important thing is, it doesn't affect the balancing. It doesn't affect the suspense. All right? In a sense, it was a trick. If the exam's asking you about the suspense account, then as far as the difference account's concerned, that mistake is irrelevant. We're still looking for this difference that still remains. All right? Next one. Ooh. When accounting for the telephone accrual, you remember accruals? We owe money? Of 70. A single entry had been made. Well, you immediately know there's an error here, obviously. There should be 2 entries for anything. I'd move your seats in case the ceiling collapses. A single entry had been made. It was the expense account entry had been missed out. I wonder who can remember our entries for accruals. During the year, you'll have paid lots of telephone, presumably. Credit, cash, debit, telephone. At the end of the year, we find we still owe 70. What entry do you make to accrue 70 for telephone? It's not that long ago, come on. I don't know how much we've paid. Maybe we've paid during the year, we've paid 1,000. I'm inventing a figure. But I tell you, at the end of the year, we owe another 70. What's the entry to record the accrual? We've paid 1,000. We now found out we owe an extra 70. How do we record that extra 70? We've used electricity for telephone. We've used telephone for the last month and not had the bill. There's an extra expense of 70. What entry will the accountant make?
Debit telephone.
Debit telephone. Do we not debit telephone to increase the expense? And where do we credit? Accruals, because we owe money. Debit telephone, credit accruals. With 70. Do you remember? We remember, don't we, Agita? Mm-hmm. And what does it say here? When accounting for it, a single entry had been made. We'd only made one entry. The expense account entry had been missed out. And in fact, look at your trial balance. The trial balance, accruals is there at 70. There's the 70 owing. That entry had been made with not debited telephone. All right? All right, come on. Does that mistake affect the trial balance balancing? Of course it does. If you've got a credit and no debit, the trial balance won't balance. Yep. Again, my problem is, does it mean the difference I'm looking for is 70 bigger or 70 smaller? All you do is this. What entry would put it right? You'll debit telephone. True? And it works. You make a pretend double entry to your pretend suspense account. Debit telephone, there's the correction. Credit suspense. It's not a real credit, it's not a real T account. But it simply means I don't need to think anymore. Whatever balance remains, that's the error we're still looking for. All right? You see what I mean there, Enisa?
Yeah.
Sorry. It's all these faces. And I said before, I mean, it's up to you. Often these you can do in your head, you know. Oh, what do I... Oh, debit telephone, right. You don't need to make up these little ones. But if ever you're unsure, I always do this. If I'm ever unsure, you know, make up little T accounts. Convince yourself. It's your choice. Anyway, we've one left. A mistake had been made when casting the purchases account. I think I told you before, although it doesn't matter at all, casting is another word for adding. 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 However, don't worry, because the rest of it makes it clear what the problem is. The total on the purchases account should have been 77,356. What total is in our trial balance? 76,182. Well, obviously, if you've added it up wrong, the balance is wrong. If the balance is wrong, the trial balance won't balance. Here's another error. How will we put it right? It's a debit balance of 76. It should be a debit balance of 77. Would you agree we need an extra debit? The double entry will be to suspense. Debit the purchases figure. Make a pretend credit to our pretend difference account. The difference is how much? Is it 1174?
Yeah.
1174. Well, if these are all the errors, then if you've understood me, I think you'd agree. The balance left on my difference of suspense account should be 0. If we've found all the errors, there should be no difference. Is it 0? 7, 16, 22, 7, 14, 33, 52. Yeah, there's 0 balance. We've found all the errors. All right? All right, a couple of things. Firstly, in the exam, for one particular reason, that would be a bit too easy. What I mean is, suppose you came to that last error, and you know the difference is 1174, but you couldn't decide which side. you know. Well, you're not stupid, surely. Try both sides and only one works. You understand me? It's not, yeah. So they're not quite that silly. They'll ask you individually ones, you know. Here's a mistake. What entry in suspense to correct it? Fine. In real life, things aren't so easy. I don't know if any of you have ever done this. I have. And you do a trial balance. You have an error of 4957. Nobody gives you a list of errors, obviously. You go through and start checking. You find an error. Shit, it doesn't balance. Must carry on. You carry on, find another error and check. Still doesn't balance. Well, of course, you keep going until ultimately you end up with zero balance, you know. You then know you've found all the errors. Okay? So it's actually quite useful. The one thing I hope I've said enough times, but this is why people get upset. Remember, it's really just a pretend account. These double entries. Can I just repeat the very first one? That first entry where receivable sales were wrong. That is a real entry. You will credit with 6.3 to put it right. There is no real debit at all. You know, all that's doing is making the debit credit work. Yeah? Credit sales. This is a pretend debit to suspense. Simply as a way of keeping check on the difference. Alright? So always say to yourself, always, whether you have T accounts or you don't, always say to yourself, what real entry do I need to put it right? And whether the real entry is a credit or debit, do a pretend double entry to suspense. Okay?